welcome you to today's presentation brought to you by the Society of Decision Professionals and Strategic Decisions Group, which is entitled The AI Advantage Embracing AI in Decision Making. I would like to introduce you to our moderator for today, William Leaf-Herrmann. William is a partner at Strategic Decisions Group, heading the North American life science practice with over 30 years of experience in corporate and portfolio strategy focused on the life sciences and R&D intensive sectors. He holds a PhD from Harvard, a BS from Purdue, and is a founding member and a fellow of the Society of Decision Professionals. Welcome, William, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Hilda and Jay. I also want to welcome everyone to today's webinar. Just to provide some context for how we're defining artificial intelligence and decision making, in today's discussion, we're taking a broad definition of AI. We're including machine learning, neural networks, expert systems, and natural language processing, just to name a few of the most common approaches that are currently being used. And the types of decisions that we're going to be focusing on are those in which decision professionals are likely to be involved, such as those that involve difficult trade-offs across multiple value measures, significant analytical complexity, or uncertainty. I'd like to, if we go to the next exhibit, I'd like to also introduce two colleagues we've reserved some time at the end of this panel discussion for questions. And my colleagues, Mikhail Petrosian and Parima Butsara-Tragun, both who work with me here in Boston, will be helping. They helped conduct the interviews that inform this panel discussion, as well as helping me field the questions. So thank you both. We'd like to start by getting a sense of the audience that we have today. So we have prepared two poll questions. So Hilda, if you could go to the first poll question. Thank you. So you see a set of choices, and the question is, to what extent does your organization use artificial intelligence to improve decision making today? The range, not at all, you're not using it, limited, moderate, significant, or at the far extreme, fully integrated. So we'll wait a minute for the responses to come in.
I think
okay.
we can. Yep,
let's close the poll. Thank you. So we see that it's sort of not at all or fairly limited constitutes over three-quarters of the responses, and this we see a significant diversity in how different sectors are embracing AI. And I think in terms of fully integrated, that would be sort of a very rare situation, because there's no one single AI platform that probably exists today that really addresses all the needs of a complex organization. So this is, so it's interesting. It's great that there are many people who are sort of thinking about how to apply AI at the beginning of the stage in their journey. We have a second question as well. If we could, and this, while there are many challenges to change and adopting AI in your organization, we wanted to get a sense of what the most important challenge in adoption for your organization. Integration, complexity, and customization challenges. Could be organizational culture, such as resistance to change. Lack of expertise, either in bringing artificial intelligence itself or associated areas like data science. There could be ethical concerns, regulatory and compliance issues, or, of course, other. So that we'll give people time to respond. Okay, I think we can close the poll now. So, so it looks like the two key areas, one is just integration complexity and customization challenges, as well as lack of expertise in the related fields to deploy this. And this is, it resonates with some of the challenges that um, other experts that we spoke with cited. I think for, one thing that we may touch on in our panel is for those companies that have really traveled perhaps farther on the journey of embracing artificial intelligence and the way they make decisions, they probably start facing organizational culture challenges, resistance to change. And once they sort of get beyond the integration complexity and find the appropriate expertise. So thank you. If we can move forward, I'd like to provide some introductions to our panelists. Just to back up a bit, in preparation for this webinar, SDG interviewed executives involved in applying AI to decision-making across several industries. We spoke with leaders of AI-based solution companies as well as academics, and we've invited 3 of these individuals today to join us in our panel. I'll introduce them. Leandro Basilio is the CEO of Deep Seed Solutions. He brings over 25 years of experience in automotive and oil and gas equipment design, but in particular in the last 15 years, he's been leading projects in the oil and gas sector, centering on global expansion, digital transformation, helping design efficient capital projects, and helping guide the energy sector's transition to net zero carbon. So welcome, Leandro. Next, I'd like to introduce Peter Ray. Peter is an experienced life science executive with extensive experience in research and development strategy and portfolio management. He's held leadership roles at Alnylam Pharmaceuticals, Celgene, and Bristol Myers Squibb. He brings a wealth of expertise in corporate strategy and portfolio optimization. I'd be remiss to note that Peter is also a former colleague of mine at SDG, and he also serves on SDP's board. So welcome, Peter. Thank you.
Thanks, William.
And I'd like to introduce Beaumont Vance. He is the CEO of Venture Science, a Westcap company. Previously, he's held leadership roles in artificial intelligence, data science, and technology at TD Ameritrade and Fidelity Investments, where he pioneered advanced analytics and risk management functions. So welcome today, Beaumont.
Thanks, William.
Okay, so if we could remove the, thank you, excellent. So I'd like to start off the discussion with a question, and I'll direct it first to you, Beaumont. How do you see artificial intelligence being utilized today in strategic planning and long-term decision-making in particular, but just in helping guide large, important decisions within organizations?
Yeah, so just to caveat, I don't have a view over some of the traditional decision sciences realms of, pharmaceutical and oil and gas. I mostly am in fintech and financial services, and Westcap is a growth private equity fund, so we have a lot of startups. Where AI has been utilized the most really has been focused on numerical data, and I've seen it used in what is called ML ops, which is a form of AI. There are some platforms like Data Robot and H2O and Data IQ, where you can put in tons and tons of data, and it will throw 430 different Python libraries and techniques at looking at the data to find a pattern, and then will return a model to you. And to some degree, I think it's still fairly advanced for people to use forecasting models at all, let alone using ML ops to derive them. And then you will run them through Monte Carlo scenarios and whatnot, and get your probability distributions. Again, I think that's kind of advanced practice. I haven't seen a lot of strategy departments adopt that, but and I think what we're starting to see a little bit is people are starting to realize that even if you do that, you're focusing on numerical data. And out of all the data that's stored in most companies, about 5% is some type of structured numerical data. And people focus a lot on that and do a lot of modeling on that, whether it's with spreadsheets or AI or whatever. The new advances since about 2017, 18, with the transformer models, of which ChatGPT is the latest, has the power is that they can unlock human language, unstructured data. And when I'm thinking about things like strategic planning and long-term forecasts, the numeric data is fine. Modeling the markets and modeling interest rates and all that stuff is great. It's necessary. But we would live in a human realm. And most things that are happening are really a matter of, human intents and perceptions, desires. And that has always been left out of the equation. So the big unlock has been that we can now run that through and actually fit that into our models. And the best way I can explain it is by example. At TD Ameritrade, when COVID hit, we suddenly saw this paradigm shift, or what you call regime change in the markets. Our daily trades doubled. The phone calls to our call centers doubled, which meant our expenses were doubling, because phone calls is a huge portion of the expense. And we had this huge influx of new account openings. And the question was, what on earth is happening, right? Like, the world just changed. What do we do about it? How do we plan and pivot for this? And what we had done is realizing that there was a lot of useful information stored in conversations and speech. We had built an AI system to ingest all of our customer phone calls, emails, chats, and survey verbatims. And so when this hit and we saw this change, what we did is we went to that database that AI had created for us, where it had read, basically 300 years of customer conversations, and downloaded them into a searchable structured database. And we had also attached that to the clickstream data so we could see behavioral data, like online behavioral data. And when we did that, we immediately, within 2 hours, could see that what had changed is that young, low wealth individuals were suddenly jumping into the markets and trading. And so they were coming and opening up accounts with an average balance of like $3,000 and doing all this trading. And they were calling the call centers because none of our materials were designed for that market cohort. I mean, they were a very small sliver of what we had done, and all of a sudden they were 50% of the business. And so we immediately could see what was happening, who these people were, what their demographics were, why they were calling, what website they were coming from where they could not find their answers. And we were able to pivot the company strategically on that because, the universe had changed. That type of exercise where I think AI will begin to take in all of this verbal data, which would include things like regulatory changes, news articles, newscasts, opinion pieces, everything about the topic and the company you're looking at, suddenly changes what you can put into the mix for your strategic planning in a really material way, because the nature of those sources of data are such that it is impossible to get that manually. If at TD Ameritrade, if we had wanted people to do this, it would have taken 312 years of man hours to come up with that answer that we got in 2 hours with an AI system. So I think more and more with ChatGPT, this is where people will start to be probing and leveraging those databases and figuring them into the strategic decision and forecasting process.
So it allowed you to really unlock 95% of the data that was available to you at Ameritrade. Interesting, fascinating. I'd also like to hear perspectives from Peter and Leandro. Peter, would you like to give a perspective from the life science domain?
Yeah, no, thanks, William. And I think what first came to mind as I was hearing Beaumont's sort of illustration just now was it would seem like it would be a real strong opportunity in, let's say, the commercial side of the life sciences space, in just understanding what are patients looking for, how are they reacting to, let's say, DTC campaigns or other digital efforts to educate patients and make them more aware of new therapeutic offerings. But you could also consider doing that also in the physician side, as they are using digital tools to educate themselves about what's out there and different labels and profiles and so forth. Now, you do start running into questions about privacy. And I know later on we'll talk about some of these ethical concerns that are related to that, particularly in the life sciences space. But just getting a deeper, richer understanding of how the target patient population and or physician prescriber base is reacting to messaging, or even like what their needs are, their unmet medical needs, because sometimes we make assumptions about certain attributes of a disease that are most meaningful, when in fact there might be other, let's say, quality of life issues that are equally or more important. And something like this could do a nice, effective job, far more effectively than a huge, sort of back office set of data scientists, or sorry, as a commercial experts might be able to do.
Thank you, Peter. Leandro, I'd value your perspective as well.
Yes, thank you, William. It was very nice to hear a point of view of Peter and Beaumont. So my professional experience is being related to efficiency of capital project, applying artificial intelligence, but in a very specific branch, that's the expert system. So based on my experience with the expert system, I believe that more and more the AI has been introduced in several industries. It seems to be a prolific process. However, I see a huge potential of application in the core process. So taking the example of the energy industry, in most of cases, we see nowadays the AI has been applied in auxiliary process with important gains, but limited when we compare with the potential gains that could be achieved if applied in the core process of these industries. So take an example of the energy industry, a full development of a capital project in an offshore environment may require an investment around $5 billion. Some cases more, in other cases less, but that's a huge amount of money if we compare with all the auxiliary process budget together. So that's important. My point of view of that, I think we have progressed significantly by applying artificial intelligence in auxiliary and support process. But I believe we have an important opportunity to progress in applying AI for the core process in the targeted companies.
Thank you very much, Leandro. And let me shift sort of to a forward-looking frame. And given the, if we think about the 6 elements of decision quality that many members of our audience know, and I'm thinking of developing an appropriate frame, creating compelling alternatives, collecting reliable and relevant information, having clear values and trade-offs across what you want as you make decisions, putting it all together with sound reasoning, and then instilling a commitment to action. I'd like to ask you, Peter, where do you see, thinking forward for the next 3 to 5 years, where do you see the greatest potential for AI to enhance decision quality?
Yeah, no, thanks, William. I think it does also speak a little bit to the question of where are you applying it. In the value chain of life sciences, you think about going from discovery all the way through to commercialization. Previously, I mentioned only about the commercialization side of it, but even in the discovery realm and everything in between in terms of drug development, there are places where you can apply this technology effectively. If I think about often where I've been operating in more of the sort of clinical development space and making decisions about new molecules. And you can also think about this in the commercial space about what new marketing campaigns or sales techniques should we be applying. To me, one of the nicest, richest opportunities would be in challenging us with new alternatives and allowing us to more rapidly figure out new ideas to effectively develop drugs or commercialize them. I think what I've experienced in the past is very often our internal experts, they fall back on what's worked previously or what is their knowledge base from their own years of experience, which is a great place to start. But often they don't know what they don't know. And often you come up with questions. Well, what did this company do, or what did that company do? And while there are other database offerings, whether it's Informa or Evaluate, or these different companies are out there that try to provide that kind of information, it's tricky and cumbersome to try to do that on the fly. If there are ways to leverage capabilities, such as we've been talking about, in terms of expert systems or AI, to ask ourselves more probing questions, or to quickly and easily, in a sort of glorified, Google search capacity, challenge our thinking with actual literal examples of, well, so-and-so did this and so-and-so tried that, and here's it. Have you considered this approach? I think that will both expand the framing of the discussions that we are having, and hopefully help us identify more creative alternatives that can really extract more value for our products. The other thing I think comes in is the mitigation of biases. When you think about the information, the sort of assessments that we use, again, you've got an expert bias that will creep in naturally based on the individuals that you are speaking with in the organization. So to the extent that we can pull in richer data sets and have easier access to assumptions and numbers, that can broaden those ranges and really sort of challenge the conventional assumptions and conventional wisdom, I think that can be a very effective way to get to better answers, more realistic ones, and just great to lead to better strategies overall.
The three areas you mentioned, framing, creative alternatives, and better understanding of uncertainty in the future, came out from the interviews we conducted. And I think it was particularly, I think there's been a lot of excitement about using generative AI, applying it to unstructured data to kind of get informal early thinking.
Yeah.
Let me pause for,
I'd be remiss as a former modeler and coder myself to say, even on the logically correct reasoning, the ability to like pull out better code or new code or models, or to build better models to begin with, I think that would be another application to highlight.
Thank you. Any comments from Leandro and Beaumont?
So connected to the previous question, so my personal opinion is that there is a great advantage to decision quality if we start applying AI in the core process of the companies. So I will keep it with the example that I comment in the previous question about the full field development in an offshore environment. It requires around $5 billion in CAPEX. So by applying a specific AI for such process in a conceptual engineering design, for instance, if we are able to save between 5–10%, that's low, we can save more. We are talking about 250 and $500 billion in saving per project. So if you think on a Pareto perspective, so if you start applying digital artificial intelligence in the core process. So in my case here, I'm work with a capital project development, but there are several other core processes where we have a great opportunity of saving. But I mean, we will face some challenge, as we can comment, like I saw in the answers, so complexity in integration. I would say complexity in integration and organizational culture can be almost the same thing. So it's something we can manage if you are serious in applying artificial intelligence in the core process. Because in oil and gas, for instance, we have some process that has been maturated for more than 1 century and has added a lot of different technologies in the process. So when we approach a company like that and say, okay, we can help you in the process by applying a artificial intelligence to do the same that you do and has been maturated for more than 1 century. So we can expect some resistance to change. But I would say the fear that people have in terms of, human replacement we don't see it as a, I mean, reality. What I can see is that when we add artificial intelligence to a project team, for instance, we can have a project team delivering even more in terms of efficiency. So then we can achieve what we can say as enhanced human intelligence. I mean, when we change the way we are working from a mechanical or repetitive way of working to a more strategic thinking, then you can deliver even more efficient result in a much reduced time that you would have if you don't have AI supporting the decision-making process.
Mhm. Beaumont, I'd like to get your perspective as someone who's executed a very rapid pivot that, as you described at the beginning of the pandemic. What were some of the challenges that you and your team had to address in doing that effectively?
Well, there's two really major challenges. The first one's human. It's a change management exercise.
Mhm.
I probably spent 90% of that project repairing all the damage to the looms that was done by the Luddites who had stormed the factory to ensure that their jobs were not eliminated by these newfangled machines, right? So that there was a tremendous amount of resistance. The second problem, and I think it's the broad problem with AI, is it's still creeping into people's consciousnesses, and I think the mental model people have is something like a magic box that you press a button and it does stuff. And I get requests all the time to build AI models to do something, and I say, well, okay, well, that's great. We're going to have to start by buying the data. People are like, the what? And it's, the data is $500,000. Well, I thought these things were open source. And I'm like, yeah, they are open source. AI engines, like a large language model, Stanford just built their own large language model. And they reported that it cost $600 to build the model, like the AI model. And that's about what it takes to stand up an LLM. Now, an LLM by itself is something like if I sold you a complete set of encyclopedias and you open it and all the pages were blank. It's like, yes, we have the model, we have the books. Now you need to fill out the data.
The content.
And data is where it becomes really a challenge. So a lot of the work we had to do was up front was really getting the data ready for the model to be able to read it. And then once you have the data, the biggest expense, honestly, is training, because the model can have the data and you can have a great model. It has no idea what to do with it. It doesn't know what a term like NNA means. Nobody here probably knows what NNA means. That's because you haven't been trained. It means net new assets. If you don't tell the model it means net new assets, or you don't tell the human, then neither will understand what NNA means in the data set, right? And so, you look at ChatGPT 3, it was $110 million and 310,000 man hours, I believe, to train that model. And it's gone up since then. So development of the AI engine, 10,000. All the data together, a year and maybe another 50 million. And then getting the AI engine to understand what to do with the data, another 100 million and, 310,000 hours of work. So getting through all those barriers and also getting people to understand that when you're undertaking an effort like this, then they say, yes, please, by all means, go AI the decision-making process for me. And you say, great, I need budget. And they're like, what on earth for? There's a learning curve, especially with senior management, to understand what it actually requires.
Excellent. And just a follow-up to that. I mean, it's clear that this is a significant investment that has to be made up front before you get any value. It's like building a railroad in a way. What are, just in terms of getting the decision makers on board, what are the barriers that you've experienced in achieving trust, transparency, acceptance for broader use of AI in the companies you've worked with?
For me?
Yes.
Some of it is education. Famously, when we launched our first ML ops platform, I had a C-suite meeting, the chief executive committee, and our chief risk officer, of all people, said, well, what happens when this ML platform takes over all people's accounts and starts making trades. And my response was the same thing that happens when my toaster decides to be a lawnmower and starts chasing the children around the neighborhood. These people have a fundamental understanding of where we are with AI, and they tend to confuse it with the movies most frequently and think that we have AGI, that it's close to human intelligence. It's really not. It really is it's a computer, and it's like all computers. It's very dumb. It's what goes in and what comes out. So the question of biases comes up a lot, and I've advised some firms that are specialized in like AI model transparency, and the systems all actually address the same thing everyone probably on this call is familiar with, which is biased data. That if you're doing any analysis, even in spreadsheets, and the data that goes in is bad, you're going to have biases. If a human's doing the analysis, you layer on the human bias. But with AI, I think the real advantage that people, I don't think quite understand, is that it's WYSIWYG, basically. That Edward Maybridge, when he was doing the first motion photography, a lot of people were claiming that it was sort of it was misleading, and it was smoke and mirrors, and it was a lie. And his response was the famous quote, "The camera does not lie. It only takes an imprint of the light of what's actually there." And AI systems are the same way. So I think we have a lot of work to do to, again, for education. People have to understand what the capabilities really are. Because what you deal with for the most part, especially I say with senior management, is they're layering on their biases, and their recency bias is going to be, they're going to reference the nearest thing they have to it, which was probably a Terminator movie they watched with their kids this weekend, right? And they don't necessarily understand what it does and what its limitations are. But in terms of that bias issue, it's the same one I faced in data science and modeling for many, many years. The modeling departments, when they're doing daily marking models for market drift, and they're doing all the tests on the data to make sure that their data is unbiased, they have representative samples, and that the samples are accurate and clear. All those things are challenges that we have with AI as well. The thing is, I don't think that actual piece is much of a challenge, because we've been doing it for a very long time. Statistics has been around a long time. The much bigger challenge is that trust level based upon the biases people bring to the table when you're contemplating an AI solution.
And I was thinking of our audience, many decision professionals there's intense interest in how to address the challenge of human biases, and training and expertise has been developed there within this community. I think the understanding the data the biases that are inherent in the data is going to be a challenge that decision analysts will have to sort of pick up, either through better integration with data scientists or other expertise, to sort of understand the potential pitfalls and know which questions to ask of those experts to tease that out and make sure that it's made transparent. Peter. Oh,
yeah,
yes.
Just picking up on that point, because I think it might also segue to where I think you were going to go. But I think what Beaumont just raised is a really critical point. You talk about mitigating expert bias, and I think as users of this technology, this capability, and we talked about earlier about how you can apply it to improve decision quality, but it really requires two things. One, a deep understanding of what actually goes into the AI models themselves. And I'll confess that I have nowhere near the knowledge that Beaumont does, right? But just pointing out, it's like your data sets will define, that limits the scope of what information you're going to be pulling in, no matter how clever you are at asking questions of it and interrogating it. And in the life sciences space, for example, if you're doing discovery medicine, you're trying to identify new targets to go after to treat different diseases. If you have access and you pay for a UK biobank, that's fantastic. It's a great data set. It's limited to the UK and the 500,000 people that were in there, and with, yes, with different, ethnic variability and so forth, but it's still that country, that diet, that healthcare system.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And now, do you have a comparable thing in the US or in Asia? And depending on what you're looking for, that's going to sort of, no matter how powerful your AI engine is, it's going to be limited by the underlying data you have in there. Not to mention, electronic health records. What's the quality of those health records? They're not always consistent from site to site, from clinic to clinic, to doctor for that matter, right? So you need to be aware of the limitations as a user of it. On top of that, you need the expertise of then saying, how do I get the right information out of these new tools that we've got? I mean, just you play around with ChatGPT or any of these other things that are open source, you can just experiment a little bit. Depending on how you phrase the questions and you put in your queries, you're going to get a different response back. And so I think that you need to develop the skill sets, just like as when you're trying to debias an expert and reframe the question or have them look at it from a different angle. I think you're applying those same skills to the tools themselves to make sure that you're not going down a confirmation bias path of your own in the sorts of questions that you are asking to the systems. So that's I think where the idea of having a devil's advocate or sort of pushing yourself to take the opposite viewpoint or view it from a different angle, even as you're leveraging the tools, I think becomes critically important.
And
Peter, William, can I
go
just
ahead.
say one thing, because Peter brought up something that we talked about in the pre-call a little bit, which is I came to Stanford because of Elizabeth Pate Cornell's work on the space shuttle, and I'm not a decision scientist, but I love the influence diagram methodology. And when she explained what she had done, what dawned on me was you had a bunch of experts from like Boeing and NASA, real great, powerful experts who had terrible expert bias, very narrow outcome ranges, right? And what she did was the genius move of going and talking to the people on the floor and talking to a lot of people. Like, that's her technique. And that is such a great analog for what we can do with AI, because now we've got a few experts and you're throwing some data at them. What AI allows us to do is process a lot more information. And if you imagine if you could process the information on, say, on the space shuttle crew, and you could capture all the discussions that were happening on the floor and all of the discussions that were happening in different groups of people, and you were getting the opinions filtered from the bias that occurs when people get in a room with a powerful person, because nobody's going to raise those objections in front of the boss. But when they're talking amongst each other or they're in a chat group on Slack, they're bringing up all kinds of stuff that never ever gets on the table for the decision, right? So my challenge actually to this audience, I would love to see somebody systematize Elizabeth's methodology into an AI-based automated influence diagram creation tool. I would absolutely love to see this, and one that brings in all the conversations and all those opinions and viewpoints from all the different participants, players from every place. And if it's drugs and you want to get the patients, every conversation happening on social media about a drug everywhere in the whole world, bring that in, right? I would love to see that data gets pushed into the process, and that's really the use of these platforms. Is it automates that data processing for us, and it gives us a much broader view. And I think that it actually is key to eliminating bias in that regard.
Fascinating. Thank you, Beaumont. Questions have been coming in, but before we turn to the questions, I want to ask one last question. I'll start with Leandro. And given your experience in trying to introduce large companies to expert systems, based on your experience, what are the ways in which a company makes strategic decisions, such as the ones that you've described? What has to change to take better advantage, or ideally full advantage, of artificial intelligence?
Great. So I will connect with previous questions regarding. We can talk about some barriers in terms of trust, transparency, and acceptance in the end of the process. So regarding trust and transparency, I think it will be more straightforward to address. So on an ethical perspective, I believe we can address this point by communicating with more transparency how the AI is working to reach the desired result, by clearing, communicating data flow diagrams and algorithms behind the AI. I think we can address the ethical thing in the process. So cybersecurity is also an area of the technology that need to receive the proper attention to ensure the protection of companies' data, personal data, and especially companies' intellectual property as well. So in terms of acceptance, I will share my experience with the expert system that's a little bit different from machine learning. That's more data-driven. So an expert system is more knowledge-driven because you need to teach the AI about how to do the work. And then after a moment, the AI will be powerful enough to do the work together with the project team. That's, I would say, the most important challenge that you need to address in deploying a expert system inside of a major organization. Because as I mentioned, in some companies, we have the process matured for more than 1 century and has added a lot of different technologies to support the process. And when we reach that project team to say, oh, okay, we have an AI to do the mechanical work to you, normally we face some resistance that we understand that's related to organizational culture. So the best way, on my perspective, to address that is to educate people. I mean, tell them that the AI is not to replace their job, but it's to empower their capacity to create value inside of the company. So when you have, for instance, AI doing the mechanical and repetitive work to you, you can move from the mechanicism, from the repetitive way of doing the project to a more strategic thinking, where we will rapidly understand how the several strategies connected will generate the most optimized result to you. And then we will change from a human intelligence to enhanced human intelligence. That's what I understand we need to teach people, to educate people, to change their idea that AI will replace their job, and then to understand that the AI will empower their job in order they can do more with less, and then save time to, spend by themselves, with their family, their kids. That's the most powerful message we need to communicate to people when we try to introduce AI in a major organization. That's my opinion based on my personal experience.
Thank you, Leandro. I'll pause for comments from observations from Peter and Beaumont.
Sorry, I think Leandro just, sort of triggered another interesting, I hesitate to call it low-hanging fruit application, but I've seen quite often that companies struggle with institutional memory, and that they often forget their own past, and decisions that have been made, or discussions that took place that looked at, should we go this way or that way? And I think it's a bear to think about trying to come up with some kind of system to keep track of all that. And I know a lot of program managers have struggled with this mightily over the years. But this seems to be a wonderful opportunity if you sort of point your expert system ML capabilities at your own internal operations. That can serve as a wonderful institutional memory. And plus, people leave, right? And expertise walks out the door. So how do you retain that in some fashion? I think that's a very interesting application of these technologies.
Let's turn, we have some questions. And one of them is, I think, a general question for the panelists, but I'll start with you, Peter, to give you some advance warning. So for long-term strategic decisions, we often say there's no facts about the future. And there's the observation, there's really not much, if any, numerical data. And for very long-term strategic decisions, and it's unclear about how much the data from the past is going to apply to scenarios that are 10 to 20 years in the future, when a drug in early development might eventually reach the market. What are your thoughts about how AI could provide insights for these types of decisions?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think First of all, I would actually challenge, the assumption that, we can't already construct models that can look at 5, 10, 15 years in the future in the life sciences space. I mean, there's enough inherent knowledge about, discovery throughput and clinical development times and potential, revenues of different types of products. I think it comes down to enhancing the quality of those types of models, because, I know, working with my teams in the past, one of the big struggles is, well, what are the analogs, and what have comparable companies or products done, and it's not just about the revenue potential. It's about OpEx, and for many companies that are contemplating moving into a new therapeutic area, or moving from rare disease to prevalent, for example, they don't know what they don't know. And so, while there might be other data sources that you can pay for and bring in and interrogate on that, can we develop tools that are more effective at bringing the historical context in? Now, you still need to apply that forward-looking judgment. There will be no replacement for that. But things that are simply based on trends, like things that are already in market, there's plenty of, I think, excellent tools out there already that can do a better job of projecting those types of things that already have, less uncertainty around them. So again, I think there is potential, but a lot of it comes down to bringing in better quality information into the process itself, and potentially on the actual modeling side itself.
Yeah, Peter, that's an awesome insight. I'm going to disappoint all the AI fanatics out there and say AI is not the appropriate tool to solve the 20-year forecast problem. It is one tool, and it is largely an automation tool. And we did an exercise at Fidelity where we were trying to model 20 years out the impact of passive funds on markets and market volatility and stock markets. And no amount of past data is going to help you. You're dealing with a nonlinear, fundamentally chaotic system that is prone to frequent and random regime changes, where it breaks all of your models because all the correlations change. And so you're going to try to predict this out how many years? I mean, it's impossible. It's difficult to project out a few milliseconds for the markets. And the techniques that we use that gave us insight and that allowed us to make the strategic decisions around this, we partnered with, we were using a lot of the work from complexity theory, and we were partnering with Laszlo Barabasi, who does a lot of work also in life sciences with molecular interactions at a cellular level. And we were using game theory with Martin Novak at Harvard. And those were the appropriate modeling techniques to use. We also ran a Lotka-Volterra model, and then ran that through Monte Carlo simulations, and did millions and millions of iterations. And if you look at like Blake LeBaron, who's running an agent-based model marketplace and is getting the insights into the mechanics, the 20-year mechanics of the markets, and exploring the total state space of the system, those approaches are effective. And you have to have a toolkit with a lot of those approaches to handle something as big and meaty as a 20-year thing. In fact, I think it was Murray Gell-Mann at Santa Fe Institute was doing some work on outcomes with treatment of liver cancer. And what they were finding was, out of the millions and millions of possible outcomes and interactions, they were getting 4 bins of attraction, which you would never see unless you had used his methodology to run through these massively complex models and use complexity theory to crack some of the difficulties of that particular problem. So AI would be like an accelerator for any one of those things, and it'll be a great input for the data for any one of those things, but it doesn't make decisions. It's a very simple brute force logic tool for the most part, and it's based on training. The framework that you build, I mean, framing the thing and approaching it with the right model is an entirely different thing. I don't think we'll ever get rid of humans figuring out what the right model is for the problem. It's a creative exercise, right? But I think anyone who's getting into the space, if they're thinking AI is going to solve X, like that in that category, is going to be just sorely disappointed for probably at least the next 50 to 100 years.
Beaumont, you mentioned from your example, it's clear that you're like using more than one AI tool is critical to kind of pressure test the thinking and the insights that emerge. Could you speak more generally about how one goes about evaluating AI tools for different purposes?
Yeah, I mean, right now, at least in the current state of the art, the best way to do that is honestly, it's a theory of constraints problem. It's looking at the end-to-end process, and you have to, just understanding that what AI is an automation tool. And we have a perfect analog for this with the Industrial Revolution, right? The Industrial Revolution was automating manual processes for physical manipulation of the physical world, right? And we spent a lot of time doing that. What it did not do, and didn't even start to approach, was automating intellectual processes with information. So today, all of our machines are made of code, all of our raw material is data, and all of our products are information for the most part. So if you bring that mindset of a production line, starting with the raw material of data and figuring what you're doing with the data to get to the output that you want, which may be a decision, which may be a product, which may be pricing, which may be a newspaper, it could be a lot of things, that you look at all the steps that it takes to do that process, and then ask yourself, where are there processes in this chain that can be automated with the current state-of-the-art AI? And some of it will be, an MLOps platform is very good at doing one thing. And a large language model can be good at doing another thing, maybe, ingesting documents. Another one might parse information, and you might put logic engines into that process. But you really have to look at AI as narrow AI, and it's usually a series of different AI tools that you place along your production line where you can, and then where you can't is where the humans go, where AI hasn't gotten to that yet. And it gets better and better. More and more of that will be automated out, and we'll have Luddites again. We have Luddites now. I know, because they were smashing my systems and have been for a few years, right? But over time, as we build these things in, they will just become integrated more and more and more, similar to what happened with computers, right? Computers were the first start. They're just really clunky instruments to do it. AI is just sort of added an accelerant to how well a computer can process things and new things like language. That's the big one.
There's a question, and I'll throw it to Leandro because I think it may be relevant to some of your comments. The audience would like to, could you elaborate on how the use of AI in a core investment process could save 10%? Just having a specific use case would be helpful.
All right, so to clarify this point, I need to share the specific application of our software that's an expert system that integrate the conceptual engineering design of an offshore system. So the whole process is a multi-dimensional process that integrates several areas from reservoir to topside facilities. And then when you do this process on a, manual approach, you end the end of the period of 9 months, that's normally the conceptual engineering time, with a very limited amount of alternatives to evaluate, like 5, 6. And when you apply an artificial intelligence to do the job to you, the system automatically generates the thousands of different alternatives to you very fast. And then we can move from making the process manually as a shared to a more strategic thinking by putting all the dots. You consider each dot as a concept alternative. You put all the dots in a graph like CAPEX against net present value, for instance, that we call as trade space exploration graph. In several different cases, client came to us with a base case well designed, and when we applied artificial intelligence to generate a new population of alternatives, that proved that the client's option was in the very middle of the population. It seems that we have half of the population, the range of the scale or in CapEx saving. We reached in several different projects numbers like 300 million of dollars per project. So I say 10%, but in some cases we can save even more. So if you consider a project of CapEx investment of about $5 billion, if you save 10%, you are saving $500 million in one project. So we have several papers published in the last 7 years, all of them with oil companies. I can share with you, have detailed explanation about methodology. You can just, reach me out in my email. We'll be more than happy to share detailed information on that.
Mm-hmm. So there's we often say the value that you can create through a decision is limited by your best available alternative. And it sounds like what from your experience, it's like creating a much wider range of alternative space that can be explored is where the value creation comes from, which I think would resonate with this audience, is thinking about that. We have time for one final question. Unfortunately, only one, but it's an interesting one. There's a question that will the time, effort, and dollars in getting structured output from unstructured data and then training the large language models needed to implement that, will these be barriers that prevent all but the largest companies to use AI in the next 3 to 5 years? Because I've also heard it the other way around, that it could be a great leveling approach for smaller companies. And Beaumont, I'd like to start with your perspective on this.
Yeah, I advised for a company called Pienso out of Washington, D.C. that it turns out actually built the same thing I had built at TD Ameritrade, except for they built it in a way that it's a universal platform. And so I think what we're seeing now, what you're going to see, and what we're seeing now already, is a lot of companies are realizing the power of this, and what they're doing is they're building tools that are no code, low code, very easy to train, largely pre-trained systems. And what's been happening is, as they get every incremental customer and they do every incremental training set, the training gets broader and broader and broader. And so you have less and less and less, terms of art that you have to train the model on. And that's what ChatGPT understands language really well. Back when we did my system in 2019, like we were training it from nothing. Now it's like, now we would only probably have to do about 10% as much training. Mm-hmm. So what you're going to see is you're right. The very big companies will try and then fail to do it themselves in-house, because big companies are very, very, very bad at innovation in doing this, especially in a production environment. And you're going to see lots and lots of heat and energy in the AI space as money flows there, of companies building these sort of plug and play platforms that will allow anybody, even small companies, to leverage the power of this stuff. And I predict in 5 years, it'll get commoditized and the cost will come down to where it's largely available to everybody.
Thank you. We're out of time. I want to thank Leandro, Peter, and Beaumont for joining us today. Found it a very helpful discussion. Let me turn it back to Hilda to close the webinar.
Well, this was indeed a fascinating presentation. Thank you so much to our speakers and moderators, and for SDP for putting this together. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's webinar. Again, I'd like to thank our presenters and for you attendees for your contribution. I also like to remind you that you can find this webinar and all previous webinars in the library section of the Society of Decision Professionals website at decisionprofessionals.com. Thank you again, and you can now disconnect.
Thank you.